Before you is probably the most obscene painting of the Renaissance. And yes, I truly believe this painting belongs in every school, at least in every sex education class, because it gives a fair warning about the dangers of carnal love and could therefore help teenagers develop a more responsible attitude. Now, I am joking, but at the same time, I am kind of not joking. Let me explain. First of all, what do we see here? In the middle, Venus, goddess of love, giving a lustful kiss to her own son, mind you, winged Cupid. He, in turn, is grabbing her breast, squeezing the nipple between his fingers. Venus is holding an arrow in one hand and a golden apple in the other. To the right, a young, cute, chubby little kid holding a handful of roses. But if we take a closer look at his foot, we'll see it is pierced through by nasty spikes. It seems like those spikes are growing from the tail of a horrific creature, half dragon and half girl. She also happens to have symbolic attributes. In her right hand, she holds a honeycomb, in her left, a poisonous plant. Now, in the background, we see two more obscure figures. An old yet muscular man with an evil stare and black wings, balancing an hourglass on his back. He seems to be locked in some kind of struggle with a woman whose head, as it turns out, is half empty. So she looks less like a person and more like a mask. But the most disturbing figure is in the background to the left of Venus and Cupid. It is a creature of uncertain sex, with grey, diseased looking skin, bloody fingers, and a mouth missing half its teeth. It is screaming, as if in wild pain. What, for heaven's sake, is this whole composition supposed to mean? Now, first of all, this is not some piece of Renaissance smut. Quite the opposite. This painting was created by a very well-known artist. His full name was Agnolo di Cosimo de Miriano, although he is much better known by his nickname, Bronzino, meaning the tanned one, so he was obviously well tanned. He was an outstanding painter of the late Renaissance, and his style is usually called manierism. This means, among other things, that he would deliberately distort the proportions of his figures in order to make us feel that we're not looking at an ordinary human being, but at some mysterious, almost spiritual creature. Here is a good example. The fingers and neck of this lady are unnaturally elongated, and her mysterious eyes are not really looking at us, they seem to pierce through us, as if she were observing some other realm. So, Bronzino was already an established artist when he began painting this allegory, now known as the London Allegory. The title is intentionally vague because we are not completely sure what the subject of the painting is, and that is exactly what we are going to untangle today. Now, it does not take a genius to realize that this painting has something to do with the lust of the flesh. By the way, it was probably commissioned by the Medici as a gift to the French king Francis I, who was rather famous for his, let's say, boudoir adventures. And if that is the case, the painting may have been meant as a warning, or even as a friendly mocking of Francis. You should slow down, the Medici seem to be saying, if you do not want to face the dangerous consequences of excessive pleasure. And dangerous consequences are exactly what this painting is about. But before we get to that, I have a small favor to ask. Hi, my name is Alexey Pashkov, and I'm an art historian. Making videos about art, philosophy, and the stories behind paintings is pretty much the only thing I know how to do. So, if you have been enjoying my work so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. For you, it's just one click of a button. For me, it's a huge sign of support. Also, your subscription might be exactly the thing that keeps me out of McDonald's uniforms, so thank you in advance. Okay, let's start by looking at the main character of the painting. Venus, the goddess of love, is holding one of her most famous attributes, the golden apple. If you remember the ancient myth, the golden apple was the prize over which three goddesses quarreled: Athena, Venus, and Hera. They chose Paris as the judge. He awarded the apple to Venus, the most beautiful of the three, and in return she helped him abduct Helen of Troy, which, as you know, set off the Trojan War. So the true meaning of the apple in this context is this: love can lead to disaster, and even to conflict on a global scale. As for the second attribute, the arrow, this is really more her son's instrument than hers. In mythology, Cupid had two kinds of arrows. One could make love enter a person's heart, the other could cause rejection and disdain. So, once again, even if the winged Cupid looks harmless enough, his love-inducing arrows are actually dangerous weapons. And indeed, we have quite a few paintings in which Venus takes these weapons away from him, or even punishes her son for being too reckless with it. Also, since ancient times, philosophers had distinguished between two Venuses. One was the heavenly Venus, the goddess of sublime spiritual love. The other was what the ancient Greeks called the popular Venus, or vulgar Venus, who symbolized the most basic physical pleasures. Obviously, the Venus depicted by Bronzino belongs to the second kind. And this second kind of love can be dangerous, which is exactly what the half-girl, half-dragon figure is warning us about. In fact, she fits the traditional symbol of fraud or deceit, which would have been easily understood by viewers at that time. Look at this emblem from a popular book. Fraud is represented as a double being, literally a two-faced woman with a dragon's feet. In other words, her beautiful outward appearance does not match her disgusting inner nature. The same idea applies to Bronzino's creature, and it is underlined by her attributes. The honeycomb stands for the sweetness and attraction of love, and for the quick, fleeting pleasures it brings. The poisonous plant with the sharp thorn, meanwhile, hints at the unpleasant consequences that love may carry with it. And what consequences exactly? Well, we'll get to that in just a second. First, let's deal with the rest of the cast of this allegory. So, the cute chubby kid with the roses in his hands is actually delivering the very same message. Roses stand for the joys of love, but his pierced foot once again implies that these joys can lead to devastating consequences of a medical nature. But love is not only dangerous, it is also not worth wasting your time on. And that is the message carried by the two figures in the background. The man with the hourglass on his back is the easiest to explain. This is Kronos, a symbol of passing time. In Renaissance culture, he was mostly a negative figure. Time was often described as a merciless predator, with teeth of steel and an insatiable appetite. It grinds down and devours every creation of human hands and human genius. Even the Egyptian pyramids will not survive the test of time forever. One day they too will turn into dust and sand. And of course, the same applies to love and human relationships. Everything you admire in the person you love, beauty, charm, wit, will inevitably be destroyed by the passing of time. Hence, another popular subject in the art of the period, Time, or Saturn, the Roman name of the Greek deity of time, armed with a scythe cutting off Cupid's wings. The meaning of this allegory is quite literal. Love belongs to the realm of youth, and time will eventually destroy it. But in this case, obviously, time is trying to pull the blue veil out of the hands of the empty-headed woman. This figure is a little trickier. Several explanations have been proposed, but the one that makes the most sense to me is that this empty-headed figure symbolizes the loss of memory. You see, according to medical treatises of the time, human memories were located in the back of the head. So it seems that Bronzino is trying to convey a rather sad message. Time will not only take away the physical object of your love, even the memory of him or her will eventually be erased from your soul. And if that is the case, why bother in the first place? Why waste your time on something as fleeting and as ephemeral as love? I mean, all of this is more than enough to make you get all that lovey-dovey nonsense out of your head and spend your time on more productive things like preparing for exams or concentrating on your career. Bronzino is being very convincing. However, he wants to get the point across in the most impressive way possible. Hence the final touch, the screaming figure on the left side of the painting. Now, what I'm about to tell you is just a theory. However, it makes a lot of sense, and I personally believe it to be true. And here it is. In 1495, the French king Charles VIII launched a military invasion of Naples. He managed to conquer the city, but the whole venture could hardly be called a success because of what came next. A strange disease began spreading among his soldiers. And then, on their way back to France, they carried that disease across Europe. Quite soon, a real epidemic broke out in several European states. At first, the disease was called Morbus Gallicus, which means the French disease. Of course, the French themselves were not exactly eager to accept this honor, so they preferred to call it the Italian disease because of its supposed geographical origin. But eventually, in 1530, a famous treatise on the disease was published by an Italian professor, Girolamo Francastoro. In the first chapter, he offered a mythologized version of its origins. According to the story, the gods punished a swineherd for his arrogance and depravity by sending this unknown illness upon him. In the book, the name of the punished man is Syphilis, and from syphilis comes the name of the disease, syphilis. Now, we're not really sure how the disease originally got to Naples. There are several theories, including the so-called American theory, which says that the first carriers were brought on the ships across the Atlantic, but that doesn't really matter for our video today. What matters are three things. First, epidemic of syphilis became a massive problem for Europe. And we can judge just how massive it was from this print by none other than Albrecht Dürer. Here we see a man suffering from syphilis. The disease is indicated by the characteristic sores on his legs. Second, the way the disease was transmitted. Of course, in the beginning, different explanations were proposed, including unfavorable constellations. In fact, that is why Dürer places a zodiac circle above the head of his syphilitic man. But pretty soon, people realized that the disease was actually sexually transmitted. Third, the way the disease was described in medical treatises of the time. A typical list of symptoms included changes in skin color, the loss of hair, nails, and teeth, and, most importantly, terrible headaches, which could eventually drive the patient insane. Now, compare this with what we see in the painting. The gaps where the teeth should be, the bloody fingernails, the horrific expression on the face of this figure, whether it is a man or a woman, clutching its head, as if trying to calm an unbearable pain. All of this fits the descriptions of syphilitic patients with frightening precision. And now we finally understand why this figure was included. This is literally Bronzino's point. Love may promise pleasure, but in the end it can destroy your body. He makes the same point in two different ways. On the right side of the painting, he chooses an allegorical approach. The spikes piercing the tender foot of the boy, who clearly was not careful enough, stand for a disease that literally eats its way through the human body. And the very same disease, now shown in the most direct and frightening and physical form possible, appears on the opposite side of the painting, as the figure of a late-stage syphilitic patient. So, do you agree now that a replica of this painting belongs in every sex education class? If you enjoyed untangling those complicated allegories with me, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Also, take a look at the value proposition in the description. It might interest you as well. Hopefully, I will see you again next week.